Standing speakers, our senior senator from North Carolina, the Honorable Richard Burr.
Thanks. Thank you, Graham, for that kind introduction. And I learned long ago, never outdress the governor. So I'm going to take that tie off so that the shots are just like his. It is indeed enjoyable to have somebody with the governor's leadership in that office. And one thing I've learned about Pat McCrory, when he says he's going to do something, he's going to do it. And everything that he ticked off for you is not just good for you, it's good for North Carolina. It's not just good for those of us that are here today. It's good for those generations that are going to be working your farms, building stronger the communities you're in. And that's what North Carolina was built on. And Graham's right, I have come here before and talked about federal policies. I'm not going to do it today. I could talk to you about tobacco, I could talk to you about ag workers, I could talk to you about health care. But I got to share with you, I don't think those are the most important things. The most important thing right now is what's the future of this country? What is America going to look like for the next generation? You can affect what it looks like on the farms that you come from. But we all have a collective responsibility to make sure that this country reflects what we inherited from our parents and our grandparents. What they spent so much time and sweat and money and lives to protect and to nurture, with the belief that every generation was going to be handed something better than they were handed. And if you just take the last month, you've seen household incomes drop over the last 4 years. Let me say that again. Household incomes have dropped. Average across America. It means that our capabilities to buy something are less today than they were 4 years ago. Well, I don't know about you, I still go to the grocery store. My wife makes me go. I still contract to have things built. Everything's going up. It's not going down. Economic growth is at a snail's pace. Unemployment's still at almost 8%. The governor's told you about the realities of how far you can stretch an amount of tax money. There's a way to solve this. Let's put the American people back to work. Let's get the policies that grow this economy in place. Let's make sure that teenage unemployment in America doesn't accept a norm of 24%, which is what it was this month. Think of that. 24% of our teenagers are unemployed, no part-time jobs. As a matter of fact, as I walked in a large building supply store this weekend, the 3 retired guys that I see every week who work full-time, not because they have to, because they want to, informed me that they had been notified, like every other employee, that they were all being cut to 32 hours. Not 40, not 50, but 32 hours. Why? Because of the Affordable Care Act. They now went from full-time employees to part-time employees so that the company wasn't penalized by the federal government and its policies. Let me just suggest to you, this is not in the DNA of America. This is not what we inherited. We inherited a country that said if you work hard, you have an unlimited opportunity. Now what we've done is we've structured a country that says don't work too hard because everybody's only going to get to a certain point. Well, you know, for us to be successful in higher education, in K through 12, for us to be successful at nurturing and developing the next person who's in the workforce that we look at and say these are outstanding workers, you won't get there if in fact their opportunity is not unlimited. If we cap the opportunity because of what federal policy says, we don't want a big difference between high and low. I'm going to tell you what, it's not going to be the top sweet potato that looks like the bottom. It's going to be the bottom sweet potato, not by that farm, but by another farm that looks like the top one. None of them are going to be great. They're all going to be poor. Now, I want to give you a few numbers. $16.5 trillion. That's how much this country owes. Every year for the last 4 years, we have spent $1 trillion more than we collected in revenue. And some of you might say, well, just go back and cut federal spending by $1 trillion and balance this budget. I don't know about you, it took me a while to figure out what $1 trillion was. So let me share with you what $1 trillion is. It's 100% of the federal investment in K through 12 education. It's 100% of the federal investment in higher education. It's 30% of the VA budget. It's 100% of the cost of the National Institute of Health, which is working on trying to cure cancer, disease. It's 100% of the cost of the National Science Foundation, which is that guidepost for some of the greatest innovations that happens in this country. It's 100% of our national defense, all branches of the military, active and reserve, all bases, domestic and foreign. That basket of 7 programs that I just described to you comes up to $942 billion. You want to balance next year's budget, you have to eliminate everything I just described to you and find another $60 billion worth of cuts. It's not as easy to do if you want to continue to have things in place that future generations benefit from for either their livelihood or their stability, and I would suggest to you for America's future. So what's the answer? The answer is very simple. Put the American people back to work. Change the policies that are in place that discourage success and replace them with unlimited opportunity. Things like robust trade agreements. You know, we went through the last 4 years and we were able to eke through a couple of trade agreements that had no benefit to the partners that we signed it with. The benefit was to the United States, to our manufacturers, to our growers, because our prices in their markets went down. Ladies and gentlemen, we're not going to put the trade genie back in the bottle. And if you're not going to put it back in the bottle and you can't, then you ought to have trade agreements with everybody around the world that you can. And the biggest beneficiary of that is going to be a state like North Carolina, because agriculture is the 800-pound gorilla that the United States has to play in an international market. Fiscal responsibility. I can't promise you today that we can balance the budget tomorrow. But I can promise you today that with the right leadership, we can get on a pathway that we all can agree that 10, 20, 15, 30 years down the road, we'll be at a level of fiscal sustainability that we can manage the finances of this country. But we're not on that pathway today, and the American people have to demand that that's where we're headed. We can't get there without reforming entitlements. We can't get there without reforming our tax code. We can't get there if corporate America is the highest taxed entity in a global marketplace. We can't get there if we have an immigration policy that nobody can figure out. You know, I'm not scared to get up and talk about immigration, because I think common sense immigration is something that a majority of Americans embrace. If we hadn't had one, they wouldn't be here. And the majority of Americans immigrated to the United States. I've got great hope that we're going to be able to do something this year. Something that 99% of you in this room would say, that embraces everything I believe. The only thing that will stop this from happening is if our president steps into the current discussions and says, no, that's not good enough. You know, The federal government was not established to try to create an avenue for somebody to get something that others didn't have an opportunity to do. We were there to create a level playing field. We weren't there to circumvent what states do, though there's an attempt to do it every day. We wrote a constitution because we didn't know what future elected officials would do without that blueprint. When the courts determine that the president has breached the constitutional responsibilities by appointing people that he can't appoint, this ought to outrage us, because most of you grew up at a time that you would never have even dreamed that a government entity would wander outside of the constitutional parameters that were established. This is not the time that we need to test what the Constitution meant. This is a time we need to embrace what the constitutional protections created for us. And we need to push from behind. I'm here today to tell you I've never been more optimistic about the future of this country if the American people will demand that we make the changes that we need to. If we don't, I will assure you the results will be something that every person in this room will experience, because they're not that far away. We can't spend $1 trillion more than we take in much longer before it has dire consequences. We can't continue to have policies that cap opportunity and believe that our country will be the leader of the world. We can't lead from behind and believe that people will take us seriously. Ronald Reagan, I think, stated it the best when he said, power is not something that you need to display all the time, but people need to think all the time that America can use it whenever it's necessary. Part of that's economic power. Part of it's military power. But most of it is the way the American people embrace the American dream. Eliminate that, and we stand the chance of what I would consider to be chaos in this country. Those that can't survive on their own, and those that can't survive with a government that's too big and too expensive and not efficient. That's where we are. So I'm here today to tell you that you need to continue to do what you do. I'm going to do everything I can from my position to make sure that the policies that I've talked about get implemented. It's not going to be easy. I come today to tell you that my job the last 12 months has been both frustrating and embarrassing. Frustrating that we haven't accomplished much of anything, and embarrassing from the fact that you actually pay us to do that. Well, I think you'll see when the president extends the debt ceiling for a mere 90 days that we've now forced Congress to say that if certain things don't happen, members of Congress don't get paid. That's the way it should be. It's time we start holding everybody accountable for performance. It's not good enough just to have the election over, but they've got to be held to a level of performance. You know, I'm reminded that Abraham Lincoln said God must have loved common men because he made so many of them. I look forward every year to the invitation to come and to speak to this group for one primary reason. No matter how successful you are on the farm, no matter how many awards you might get as individuals. Everybody here has a common bond. You know what it's like to get your hands dirty. You know what it's like to sweat. You know what it's like to take a risk when you put a crop in the field. You know that Mother Nature can have an effect on it. You know that the markets can have an effect on it. And that doesn't separate you in any way. You see, I see in this room what America used to look like. And it's going to be those areas that haven't changed that are the model for how we get this country cohesive and back together again. For your contribution, I'm here simply to say thank you. God bless.